Welcome back to the Chris Macpherson Show, episode 004. A big thank you for all of your feedback to this point. I know one of the big talking points alongside our irreverent content has been the production quality, and we do apologise in advance today. A little bit of an internet snafu on the road means that the quality of my image won't be as clear and crystal as it should be, but we will hopefully be back to normal levels and improving next week. But in the meantime, we are here to talk irreverently and pick apart some sporting landscape action. And the headline items this week are going to be round ball and F1. And we're really looking forward to this. We've had great feedback on our F1. So we've elevated our producer and motorsports aficionado, JR Carter, to the headline act in the show. JR, the promotion, mate. You're up at the top of the order. We're going to dig into the F1.
It's good to be back and good to be at the top of the order, opening up the batting. So let's get to it.
So you did well enough, mate. We might get a call up for the test in a couple of weeks, opening the batting here today, but we'll see how we go. We'll get through some motorsport first. And in terms of it, the F1, it's the circus that never stops. And it was penalty central at Interlagos on the weekend.
It certainly was, Chris. One of the more action-packed races we've had for quite a while, and like an absolute wet track is the easiest way to describe it. Qualifying was delayed overnight, so rather than doing an afternoon qualifying, they did it early hours of the morning. So I think 7:30 local Interlagos time was when they got the qualifying session up and running, and there was crashes galore during qualifying, to the point where Alex Albon's car didn't even make the start of the race.
Yeah, it was a bit of mayhem watching back, and again, I was sort of more of a highlights character on this one than I was a full race, as much as there was some entertainment to be had. But across the weekend, even in the sprint race, there was some challenges. But as you say, the wet weather, it created some pieces around the timing. And then a reduced field, we saw some people that just really struggled, I guess, with simple rules of engagement on how to participate in an F1 race when certain things occur.
That's right. And that probably takes us into our first real topic, which is about Max Verstappen getting his revenge back on the back of Lando choking on the first lap again. But that was a action-packed first lap to begin with, or before the first lap, where during the formation lap, Lance Stroll, a driver who's been in Formula One now for 8 years, has spent time on the podium, could not complete the formation lap, went onto the white strip, spun the car around. I've heard the words brake failure come out today. That he needs to be stopped. And I'm going to bring in Lachie for this. What is this driver doing in Formula One in this day and age?
Yeah, it bemuses a little bit, doesn't it? And obviously we know the reason why he was brought into the sport at such a young age was because the money of his father. You know, there's no dancing around that topic. I think there's a tiny bit of perspective needed, and we need to know that he is not Nikita Mazepin. As you say, he has made the podium a couple of times, so he is somewhat of a decent driver. But he has shown time and time again throughout his career in F1, he's probably not quite up to it. And yeah, it's moments like these that have us scratching our heads sometimes.
I mean, would we see, let's take the name out of this, would we see another driver given anywhere near this opportunity? Admittedly, he's a mid-tier car, right? We're not talking about, he's not in a Ferrari or a Red Bull, but 3 podiums across 8 seasons, but lots of brain fades, lots of just dumb moments. Other drivers have been hung out to dry for a lot less.
That's right. Like Exhibit A is probably Danny Rick, like the last year, where Danny Rick just had luck go against him and he's gone. Like he's not going to be returning to the sport anytime soon. Whereas Lance has just had chance after chance after chance in recent memory.
Yeah, I mean, life ain't fair, is it? No. F1 is a brutal sport, and we saw. From an Australian sense, Oscar Piastri, his entry into F1 was probably delayed by a year longer than at least we would have liked it because of Guangzhou and the sponsorship dollars that he came into the sport with. So it's never been the 20 best drivers in Formula One. That's just not how the sport's worked, and it leads to these kinds of scenarios with Lance Stroll.
Certainly does. And getting back to what we were alluding to at the top of the show, Lando Norris choking on the first lap yet again. So by the first corner of the first lap, Lando was not in the lead of that race, playing right into the hands of Max Verstappen, who was down in 17th starting, who in the end came back to win the race by 19 seconds. strategy did come into play quite a bit in this, with Max getting effectively a free pit stop from the red flag that occurred later in the race, and Lando and Charles Leclerc both opting to take a pit stop in moments before that red flag was about to occur. So they took it under a virtual safety car as it ended, which meant they also lost all advantage of the virtual safety car to begin with.
Certainly hands Max a bit more of an advantage now as we head into the final races. Is it still in the balance, or do you think it really is an advantage to Max now, JAR? Has he got, maybe not a full hand, but maybe 2 or 3 fingers on that championship trophy?
Look, I think it's wrapped up at this stage, unless Lando brings out some absolute theatrics over the next couple of weeks. While we were at the point where, like a few weeks ago, it was like close enough where if 1 and 2 they get really, really close. I think now that Max has had like a high advantage race, unless there's a DNF from Max over the next couple of weeks, which I can't remember the last time we've seen a Max DNF, to be honest. We're going to see Max get his 4th championship this year.
So what you're telling me is there is a chance, it's bloody slim, and we're actually looking at Lando theatrics, and we're not talking about the ones we've been seeing lately of first lap negative hijinks, and we need Max to poop the bed, basically. So if Max poops the bed, Lando can flip around his, theatrics to be positive instead of negative. You've got a very faint glimmer of hope if you're a fan of the orange cars.
You really do have a faint glimmer of hope. And let's not forget that like a lot of what Lando has achieved the last couple of weeks has been on the back of some team orders, which we did see during the sprint race a few days ago with Oscar on pole, Oscar leading most of the race, and then them switching the cars around because of Lando's advantage.
Who'd be an F1 driver? There's team orders. There's all these things to take into account, and then there's the confusion of traffic lights. Apparently, they throw them out. So, look, it's certainly not dull. We head to a little bit of a lull in the calendar now, if you will. We've had a few back-to-back races, and we head to Vegas next in just over 2 weeks' time.
That's right, and more importantly, friendly Australian broadcast times. We've got a 5 p.m. race, 5 p.m. qualifying. So, all about that sort of thing.
That's what we like to see. So we're looking forward to that. The 24th of November in Vegas. It's the run home. There's still lots of things to wash out. The Constructors' Championship still getting sorted as well, JR. Have we got a thought on how that plays out from here?
Look, in terms of Constructors, I think it's McLaren's Constructors' Championship to lose at this stage. Red Bull, I don't believe they can make that gap back up. Ferrari, if they keep having good results, and like it was strategy that fell down as well as Sainz's car going into a bit of a crash. So Ferrari really are sort of the dark contender here, where they can catch up with McLaren, but based on Checo Perez's form, I don't think Red Bull can get anywhere near that top spot again. As for the back marking in terms of the champion, like Constructors' Championship, Alpine had an absolute banger of a weekend, moving up 3 or 4 places to the tune of $50 million in prize money, just with their 2 drivers getting the double podium, which is great to see from Alpine. They've had a rough couple of seasons, and for them to actually get some results, sort of, if it was absolutely pouring rain, is a great thing to see.
Certainly is. As you touch on there, we've got 36 points differentiating between McLaren and Ferrari. So if someone chokes on either side, it kind of could determine it. But as you say, the excitement between and the money tiers that fall into place here, 6th, 7th and 8th, Alpine on 49, Haas on 46, RB Honda on 44. So there's 5 points. So that's just a couple of low place finishes across the last 3 races. There's some money up for grabs at the back of the grid.
And that's probably where like the real excitement is. Like because I genuinely believe Max has got this wrapped up, but looking at like what's happening at the back of the grid is going to be exciting going into the next season as well.
Well, we'll keep tuned, and we look forward to talking F1 again in a few weeks with you. You'll be able to put your feet up and get on the 1s and 2s more, mate, over the coming weeks with a little bit less F1. But thank you as always, and we'll take a little bit of a break, and we'll come back with a plethora of round ball action. Well, now we've wrapped up the motorsport. It's time to move into the round ball action, and as we do when we talk round ball, officially now in this part of the show, we bring in Lachie Avil from Round Ball Australia. We kind of just dragged you into the motorsport for a drive-by, pardon the pun, on Lance Stroll, but this is the meat and potatoes for you, mate. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, drive-by is apt. Caught me off guard slightly, but I got the unmute button quick enough. I think I did okay.
Always the expert. And as we always say, we're going to dig into a bit of high-level A-League action here. But if people are looking for a bit more in-depth A-League analysis, both written and podcast formats, where can they head?
Yeah, Roundball Australia, Google, Spotify, YouTube, podcasts, wherever you go, find us there.
At a football ground near you, any of the above?
Yeah, probably as well.
Exactly. The team are everywhere, and it's great to be part of them, and great to have you on here, mate. But let's talk about the A-League men's, and it feels like the season's been going for quite a while. It's starting to heat right up, and I don't want to say it reached a crescendo because I want to feel like it's going to keep going up from here, but the Kiwi Classico looked like it was going to be an enthralling 0-0 draw, and then all of a sudden Auckland went, no, we're going to change this to a double measure.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. And you're right. This kind of feels like the end of the first act of the season because we've had the Sydney Derby week 1, the Melbourne Derby week 2, and of course the New Zealand Derby for the first ever time in week 3. So the APL have obviously laid that out. So we have this really nice run in, that marquee fixture every week, which I think has been really, really good. We know that the in terms of like TV reach and the attraction of the league is up almost 50% on the same numbers last year. So I think that's a huge success. But yeah, this is an amazing game. And just so many storylines running throughout, right? You had Alex Rufer, who was ruled out of the team on Thursday and passed the late fitness test on Saturday afternoon and snuck his way into the starting 11 and then going absolutely straight through one of the Auckland players within the first few minutes. It actually reminded me of that moment from there's the documentary on the American basketball Olympic team, the Redeem team. And there's a clip about all of Kobe Bryant's, teammates talking about how the fact they played Spain and in the first play he just runs straight through the chest of Paul Gasol. And it really felt like that moment from Alex Rufer. He's like, I don't care if I play with this guy. I think it was Rogerson who they've played together in the Kiwi team before. And it's like, nah, I'm going straight through him. This is a rivalry and there's going to be a bit of bite in it. And it was brilliant. It really set the tone. It was good.
So the headline here, Alex Rufer equals Kobe Bryant.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm telling you.
Why not? And in terms of it, as you say, it was phenomenal. There was obviously, we've had the whole build-up with the Paulson story. We had the build-up with the flyby last week. This is the theatre that the A-League needs to really bring itself into the mainstream consciousness. And we'll talk about those TV ratings you're talking about a moment ago in a little bit. But the A-League's arriving. It feels like it's another arrival of the A-League almost. And it's certainly... I've got a lot of lippy Kiwi friends at the moment who all of a sudden have taken a real interest in the A-League, even though a lot of them still weren't doing it last year. They were still, dyed-in-the-wool league and union fans. But now that there's two teams, they've got a rivalry there. It's an us and them within there, but then it's a united us versus them being the Aussie teams. It's adding another element. It's nice.
It is, and it feels like this is just contributing to the overall rise of New Zealand football. I mean, their national team is doing great things. Looks like with Oceania getting a guaranteed spot to the World Cup, they're going to be claiming that, probably every time for the foreseeable future. So that's great for them. And you're right, the New Zealand public definitely seems to be getting around it. They got 26,000 to Sky Stadium the other day, which is more than the All Blacks against Argentina a few months ago. So that's a really nice comparison right there. So it's clear that the interest is there. And, it's going gangbusters. And I think they're really doing a great job of leaning into that kind of A-League idea of marketing. On the pitch, they're treating themselves very seriously and it's a football match, but off the field, they're not afraid to take the piss out of each other and themselves a little bit, which I think is great. It adds to that A-League vibe, and it's really started off really well. So, yeah, and we only have to wait a few weeks to get to the next one as well.
We certainly do. We can't wait to see that. There'll be no love lost as we see how that turns out. And look, it's an interesting one. There's even talk, I heard the other day, expansion's always on the horizon with the A-League, but talk of a third franchise that might want to throw their hat in the ring. So I'm not sure how that'll work out.
Yeah,
It'll ruffle some feathers. It always does. I don't know about it. It might just be a bit of, overreaction. But, hey, we don't mind an overreaction here. So why not get 3 or 4 teams over there? We'll get enough, maybe they can put one in the NST.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, anyway, and again, the NST was very front of mind recently, so we won't dig into that too much. But again, jump onto Roundball Australia. There's an episode you guys did talking about the latest news there, so only in the last week or so. Let's have a look now at how things stand. As we said, it feels like there's been a real chunk of the A-League gone already, even though we're only 3 weeks in. Is the cream starting to rise to the top? Most of the teams that people have talked about being genuine threats and contenders outside of your tip for Brisbane, who, I know they've had a bye, mate, but they're anchored pretty low at the moment. Is the cream rising to the top? Are we already starting to see the best teams at the top? And, it feels like it's starting to settle out into roughly the spots where it should be, or is it just a bit of good fortune in terms of the matchups we've had so far?
Well, I think in terms of the top three, you got Auckland FC, Melbourne Victory, and Sydney FC. I think that is going to be the cream of the competition this year. That order might fluctuate and one or two might drop in and out, especially in the early phase of the season. But I expect those three teams, the big blues, as I'm calling them now, I'm throwing the Auckland FC into that mix. I think they will be top three come the end of the season. They've proven that they have the squad and the ability to do so, even with Sydney dropping points last week. I'm really not too concerned about them in the long haul.
That would be interesting to see. Well, if you have a look at it, blue's the colour to have. Of course, the four sides with a real raft of blue, although my Newcastle Jets fans will hang me for not mentioning them, but I'm not sure if they think they're gold or blue some days. Sitting at the top, Melbourne City in fourth, as you say. So it's an interesting piece. The next one I want to talk about is talking about those teams that were predicted to be at the top. What's happening at Western Sydney? Is there need for concern? I know it's only 3 games. We are, by my maths, 11.111111% of the season gone. It's a long season, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater just yet. But is it time to start getting worried if you're part of the RBB or the Red and Black fan crew?
I mean, to be honest with you, I was worried about them before the season. You do say, and you were right, that a lot of people had them towards the top of the table. I never quite saw it, to be honest, because they have a really good front four, and we saw that on the weekend. They're going to be able to score goals, but their defense and even in midfield, like obviously Tristan Vidakovic was at fault for majority of the goals that they conceded on the weekend, but they didn't make things easy for him either. And the last goal as well, I think it was Zach Loft that played that through ball. There is just this gaping hole in midfield that was just inviting him to walk into. So there is plenty of defensive worries. We even saw it last week. Jack Clisby header into the box instead of clearing it away. It puts it straight back into the middle for Hiroshi Ibasuki and costs his team 2 points. So, massive question marks over the Western Sydney Wanderers. It doesn't seem like their back five and then their 2 in midfield as well are doing anywhere near enough to keep the goals out at the moment, despite the fact that, yes, their young goalkeeper in the net didn't have the best of days. But Lawrence Thomas will come back. He'll be a more reliable goalkeeper. So if they really want to earn their way back up into finals positions, then they have to really focus on the middle of the park and ensuring that the spine of their team is really up for the fight.
Well, we'll get into their game in a moment for this week ahead, but you talked about it before, the free-to-air TV record ratings, almost 50% up. Is it a fair measure? I know there's been much more of a focus of a push from Channel 10 around those time slots. We've also had, the succession of games on 10 Bold, etc. With the women's game, we had a feast of football on the weekend as well. Do you think it's a genuine measure, or is it the fact that there's more content, more readily and more advertisers available, or is it somewhere in between?
I think it probably is somewhere in between. I don't quite understand the intricacies of the different rating systems. From my understanding, having the 3 games in a row on Saturday is advantageous for the reach statistic because it can capture one person that just flicks on, in between or throughout that whole session. So maybe it's slightly inflated in that way, but it's undeniable that the marketing from the APL and Channel 10 in collaboration this year has been better than we've ever seen it, really, at least in my recent memory. So, as I talked about with Auckland and Wellington, really leaning into that kind of peak A-League kind of ethos of what we have here in Australia and New Zealand. And it's really resonated with people. So that's definitely been successful. So I think that has something to do with it. You're getting a lot of young Australians getting an opportunity, which is exciting. You've got the likes of Juan Mata, Douglas Costa, these big names to draw people in as well. So I think overwhelmingly positive. It's been a really good start to the season, some really fun football, some horrendous mistakes, which is fun depending on what side of the game you're on. But it's just peak A-League as we know and love. And yeah, I can't wait for more of it.
It's certainly, as you say, peak A-League. It's been really exciting. I feel they've kind of got as close to a perfect mix as they can with what they're working with. Some big names. The scheduling's worked quite well, as you touched on before. There's one meaty game to look forward to each round, which is probably carrying some of the headlines and other things. A lot of the games have delivered as well. We've had some really enthralling games across there. We've had some average ones too, but they've probably been smothered under the covers a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see as we go over the next few weeks if they can sustain and maintain that. The novelty of Auckland wears off. A few other teams maybe revert to, their standards a little bit. we'll wait and see. Maybe Central Coast will start winning or losing, stop having draws. That might do something too. We'll wait and see, but I think hats off to them for the now. We're happy to lay the boot into the APL and any other organising body when we get the chance. So, look, I'm not going to celebrate them quite yet, but I will doff my cap to them for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, great start. We'll see what they can do for the rest of the season. It's all about that consistency, as we like to say. The teams have to bring the consistency on the pitch, and the organising bodies have to bring the consistency off it.
Yeah, well, we like the type of consistency they've delivered this year, not the same sort of consistently inconsistent stuff from last year and the years before. We'll see how we go, whether we can get through the next couple of weeks, including Unite round unscathed before we're ready to lynch them again. But let's move on from looking back and let's look ahead. Another round in front of us, only a couple of days away. The way the ladder's sitting at the moment, it's mostly bottom teams against top teams. There's no top 6 clashes this week. There's just the one bottom 7 clash. And that is that team we talked about before, the Western Sydney Wanderers up against Newcastle Jets. Newcastle Jets fresh off a bye and a win against Macarthur. This is an interesting challenge, and I think it should tell us a little bit more about both of these sides.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I hate to say it because I know you're deeply embedded in the Newcastle Jets ecosystem. I think the Wanderers will have the better of this one. It was a great win for Newcastle, of course, before the bye in round 2 against the Bulls, but it was a couple of pieces of brilliance from one player, Eli Adams, that got the job done. And I thought the Macarthur was significantly the better team on the night. I said this on the show as well. I think if you played that game a few times over, the Bulls would still have the rub of the green. So with the way the Wanderers are playing, literally anything could happen. It's a bit of a chaos game. It probably sets up that way. So it's going to be good entertainment for your Friday night, no matter what, I think.
I agree. I'm really looking forward to getting out there. I think it could be very entertaining. It could. Both sides have got a propensity to leak a goal they shouldn't leak. So we'll have a look at how that plays out. It'll be an interesting one, and I think it's a good opportunity for one of those two sides, possibly if they can take the 3 points, to put themselves up amongst the contenders, at least for the time being. So we'll watch and see. In terms of other teams on the ladder, the questions I've got for you, Lachie, there's 4 teams that are undefeated at the moment. Who is going to be the last team to lose a game in 2024-25? We've got Auckland, we've got Melbourne Victory, we've got Adelaide, and bizarrely, Central Coast Mariners.
Yeah, Central Coast Mariners. That's a really odd one. The Victory on the opening day should have lost. Adelaide United probably should have lost. Perth Glory, they should have beaten Perth Glory, really. It's kind of remarkable that they didn't. I think Auckland, it has to be Auckland or Victory. Adelaide and the Mariners, when they get a tough fixture, I think they'll go down, or probably between the two of the big blues. Tough question. I mean, it obviously depends on the fixtures. I actually don't think it's too long until they play each other. So maybe that Auckland's Victory game in maybe a month or so, maybe that'll be the deciding factor.
It might be a deciding factor. I'm going to lean towards Auckland again. From what we've seen, even in that game on the weekend, for that large, long period, they just held in there when they needed to. They looked a gritty, cohesive unit. So, again, we're not talking about making sure you win every game. We're talking about making sure you don't lose.
And they haven't conceded a goal.
Well, that makes it very hard to look. It's almost impossible to lose, some would say, if you don't concede goals. On the flip side of the coin, who's going to be the last team to win for 2024-25? There's 5 winless teams, and again, the Central Coast Mariners feature in this list because they're loving a draw. We've got Western United, Western Sydney Wanderers, Perth, and Brisbane. Who's your tip? I know you're high on Brisbane. They're sitting at the bottom of the ladder with nothing to show. There's a couple of these sides that you could quite easily see, getting some wins. But again, there's some weird matchups that see. I know, for instance, Brisbane have got quite a tough run having a look ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I'm still back in Brisbane. They've lost to Auckland, Sydney by a goal, and they're playing Victory this weekend, which they'll probably lose as well. So it's going to be a great turnaround for the Roar from going 0-3 and then making their way up into finals. I can't wait to see the look on everyone's faces when that eventuates. I think Perth and Wanderers just have enough chaos about them where I think they're going to pick up a win somewhere. They'll probably lose 5-0 one week and then win 5-0 the next week. And I'm actually eyeing off Perth against Melbourne City this week as potentially the game where that happens for the Glory. And then the Wanderers one game, eventually something will click and they'll score 4 or 5 goals. And maybe they'll actually concede a few anyway, but they'll just score more than their opponents. I reckon it's going to be the Mariners. Look, they just don't look like the same team. And obviously they're not because, they've lost so many players. It's that ship of Theseus argument. You lose all your championship players, you're really a championship team, right? So they haven't really looked too cohesive. They've got another tough run of Asian fixtures to contend with as well. That's already pulling the legs out of them. I think they're the ones that are going to struggle to get a win on the board.
Wouldn't it be funny if they were the answer to both of these questions?
Potentially, just draws forever.
Just draws forever. I'm going to go with Brisbane. I just think that I see the Mariners maybe just stumbling across the line for a win at some point, although they couldn't do it at home against Perth. So when do they do it might be the question. 21st of December, Brisbane versus Perth could actually be the deciding factor in this run. We'll have a look for that one. Best summed up, the Central Coast Mariners, they're currently a championship club, not a championship team. The trophy sits in the clubhouse. The team doesn't hold it because it's the remnants of a team that won it. There's bits of it in Auckland, there's bits of it in Europe, there's bits of it everywhere, but not many pieces of it left on the Central Coast. So they are an interesting side to watch. As you said, a big Asian load as well. A midweek game this week into their next week's games. We might wrap it there, Lock, and we might take a little bit of a breather, grab a beverage, and come back and rejoin you with some A-League women's action to close out the show. Well, back on the round ball train, and we are looking at the A-League women's competition. It got underway on the weekend, and there was certainly some interesting stories. But the biggest headline story, Lachie Avil, Goal Central, a record for round one, 31 goals. And it wasn't even a case, we sometimes see these records broken, mate, where it's one or two games have an absolute plethora. Every game had at least 4 goals, up to 7. It was just phenomenal to see so many, in terms of these teams hitting the ground running on hot days at the start of summer weather.
Yeah, it really is kind of crazy. Just consistent goals absolutely everywhere. Maybe the defense a little bit not gelled yet, and they got to tighten up a bit more. But it's funny because the question for a lot of these teams was really where are the goals going to come from. The best example is up in Newcastle with you, Chris. Serena Bolden came in a few weeks into last season and then scored so many goals for the Jets. Well, she's headed off to Europe, so who's going to score the goals now? And all of a sudden, literally every team has put at least a few away. So crazy weekend of dub football, and goals are good because that's what makes football fun, right?
Well, it certainly does. It might not tickle the fancy of the purists all the time, but we're trying to engage the casual fans. And look, if this many goals isn't going to engage the casual fans, and we saw some really good crowds, the Jets, and it's probably the nice segue there. They went up to Cessnock, some questions about the pitch. It was clearly painted green, which is a new novelty. But hey, that's peak A-League if anything is.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, we loop him back into the Formula One segment. You know how, like, in Albert Park, they paint the water to make it look a little bit more blue when the F1 comes to town. Similar vibes up there.
Look, you do what you have to get a game on, I suppose. But the Jets, the story I want to talk about there, it wasn't about the goals. It wasn't about the fact they came back from 2-0 down to get a 2-2 draw. But Alexis Collins, showing that pathway, she dominated this year. She was their leading scorer in a much improved effort from the emerging Jets in the NPLW. Ryan Campbell rewarded her with a contract. She got a scholarship, the Academy Scholarship, on Wednesday or Thursday. It was announced. On Friday, she got told she was starting and leading the line. She played 75 minutes, didn't get on the score sheet, but certainly didn't look out of place, and then got to go back to school the next day. So it's a bit of a whirlwind few days if you're 16, isn't it?
It's crazy. And, we've seen similar stories in the A-League Women's before. Correct me, you're going to have to remind me of her name, but the young goalkeeper that came in during the final series last season as well.
Tiana Robertson, yeah.
There you go. There's another one of these stories really doing well for the NPL. There's a gap for whatever reason last season. It was a suspension. You get the call up and all of a sudden you're starting in important games, opener or a finals game. It's really cool that these pathways are producing these kinds of players and that they can step up and have these opportunities.
Certainly is. The good news for young Alexis is she probably won't have to go to school on Friday because the Jets will head over to Perth, as we'll see when we look into the fixtures in a minute. But in terms of it, it was interesting to see and a little bit refreshing talking to Ryan Campbell after the game, and he openly admitted they dominated the second half. And, we hear coaches come out with those sorts of statements all the time. We were the better team, but we didn't get the points. But he openly admitted that they left 2 points on the table. I think the quote was they were 2 points missed. One, I like the openness and honesty, and I like from a young Jet side, he talked about the fact that they weren't, in the situation they were a couple of years ago where they would have been happy to have that draw. They were disappointed. The mood was down in the shed because they lost. I think that's got to be a good sign for that young side. Yeah,
and that's what you're looking for, really, for every team at the start of the season, right? You work so hard in pre-season to get your team and yourself personally to a place where you can go out there and win football matches. You want to be disappointed when that doesn't happen. So regardless of where which team you're playing for. We know that Melbourne City, Sydney FC, Melbourne Victory, these teams have always been consistently strong in the A-League. But even if you're not one of those teams, you want to be coming into a fresh season with that optimism and that drive and the belief that you can go on and do something special. So, yeah, it's absolutely good that the Jets are feeling that way. And, as I say, every team wants to be in that position where if you do cop a loss, then you're disappointed because you think you're better than that. And that gives you the motivation to hit the training track pretty hard and come back stronger next week.
Yeah, 100%. A team that has to be disappointed with their effort. The Perth Glory, they went to Melbourne. They led Melbourne City, who you just touched on. They're one of the powerhouses in the A-League women's over recent years. They led 2-0 after 51 minutes. They scored their second goal in the 51st minute. They've done well through the first half. And then I don't know what happened, whether Melbourne City all of a sudden realised that kickoff had happened about an hour ago. But all of a sudden they fired in 3 goals in 10 minutes and another 2 just for good measure to win 5-2. I think it touches on the class, probably, gap between the two sides that they can just do that over a window. But surely you've got to be questioning, if we manage to keep them out for 52 and a bit minutes and score 2 of our own, how do we have that lapse? And again, it's, out of those, the article book that is, stories that should only happen in the A-League. It's, for both coaches, though, is there positives to take? Is there negatives? How do you handle this in the week after?
I don't know. It's quite rough. And, Perth Glory as a team, they've lost a lot of quality over the off-season. Susan Fong-Song Cam has been injured, who's probably one of the players that they were going to look to rely on to score their goals. They've lost Millie Farrow, who was exceptional for them towards the back end of last season. And you look at those kind of players leaving the club and you see the injury, you think, oh, maybe they're going to struggle a little bit this year. And then this is one of those games where I was just getting notifications pop up on my phone. I'm like, Perth Glory 1-0. Wow, okay. Perth Glory 2-0. What is going on here? And then it gets even crazy and Melbourne City have this comeback. So, yeah, you're right. It is just another one of those PK League games. It'll be tough for Perth because, at least you can take the positive out that you did manage to score those 2 goals. And that's a good thing. But to then slip up and concede 5, that's rough. So, maybe they are going to be one of those sides that's going to find it challenging to get that motivation back for round 2 because, when something starts so positive and then it's ripped away from you like that, it has to be hard to respond.
Certainly does. We often talk about Perth and the men's side and the travel they do. And, we sometimes forget the men are, fully professional. And while I understand a lot of the women are now on, what are classed as full-time contracts, a lot of these girls aren't full-time. They're balancing other commitments. That travel is not, something to be, trifled or misconsidered. So those sorts of things can add to it. And again, if you're a yard shorter of a run, those sorts of things, you're not quite as, at the level of fitness. Melbourne City have got some of those facilities. I have to admit, I'm not, right across the detail of Perth's training base and Perth's facilities, but Melbourne City clearly, they're affiliated with the Melbourne City, with the Manchester City group. They've got a lot more resources and things as a club. There might be some elements there, and as you know, if you start shipping a couple and you're starting to fatigue, it's quite easy. So we'll wait and see. I want to see more of a sample size from Perth before I completely, ostracise them out from and say that they're miles off the pace. Take the positives: 2 goals against one of the top teams in the league last year. I think that's all you can do out of this. Try and wipe the 5 goals from your memory and try and bounce back against a Newcastle side who are going to be hungry this week. So certainly an interesting space as we go forward. Speaking of interesting, one of the off-season transfers that was talked about a lot was Kaya Simon being pulled back out of the Central Coast Mariners by Sydney FC. People were expecting, it was almost Sydney FC's, to lose. They're going to go on another run and do what Sydney FC do. And someone forgot to send that script to Gosford. Yeah,
they did. Amazing, really. Just the Mariners coming back into the competition last year, they were really one of the surprise packets. And Emily Husband just come in and done a really good job to get them organised. And their defensive record last year was one of the really impressive things. The fact that they were able to bring in this group of fresh players, at least to each other. And when they come on the field in the A-League women's competition, they were able to keep out so many goals. And having that defensive record just makes them such a solid team. And they weren't able to get it done. It was in the semi-final against Sydney FC, right, last year. So that was their bogey team, I guess, and they come back and put in a pretty good shift here. So, yeah, one of those teams that you look at the quality of the coaching and you think, okay, maybe you don't have the star pieces that Sydney FC do. We know that they're one of these destination teams, as we talked about in the league. But a well-coached team with a system that everyone understands can be just as valuable. And I think, Emily Husband really showing her worth here.
Yeah, I certainly think Emily Husband probably a name to be destined for future honours again further up the chain. We know she's been very well regarded with some of the opportunities she's taken previously, so we'll keep an eye on what she does. But certainly the Central Coast will be hanging on to her for tooth and nail. Let's shift our focus forward again, like we did with the men's. And speaking of Central Coast, Friday night lights, Western United, Ironbark Fields on a Friday night. Where else would you want to be? Tarneit. This one actually, though, hopefully they get a decent crowd for this, because this should be a really good game, Western United versus Central Coast, to kick off round 2.
It should be. And I'd be very high on Western United this year. They're a team that had a couple of their really important players injured going into the final few rounds in the final series last season. They looked really good since Kat Smith came in, when Mark Torcaso left to just assume full responsibility with the Philippines national team. And after that point in time, they looked really, really good. So a fresh campaign, a fresh off-season, still a lot of those star players are there. I think they're one of the teams to beat this season. It's only their 3rd year in the comp, and they've gone very close both times realistically. So, yeah, interesting matchup. Obviously, 2 teams that will be want to compete against each other towards the back end of the season and the pointy end. So, it should be a high-quality match. And, Friday, Ironbark Fields, that has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
Well, we'll see how it goes. I think it's perfectly poised for the dub to, fill that out, get a really good crowd in there, and see what we can deliver. Speaking of down in Victoria, speaking of dub, and speaking of this weekend, we don't have big derbies in the men's this weekend, but we've got the Melbourne derby in the women's. Victory versus City. This is a nice rivalry. They're 2 really strong teams over the last few years. They seem to come up against each other in key clashes late in the season. This is a nice one to get it underway early in the season. How do you see this one shaping up? It's going to be the curtain raiser for the I think it's the Victory men's game as well. It's going to be an interesting one, and these 2 teams neither of them looked at absolutely their best on the weekend. We've already talked about City. They obviously had a bit of a nap for the first 50 minutes. They can't afford to do that against Victory this week. No,
they can't. And, I think we've seen this matchup a number of times before. We always know how Melbourne City teams are going to play. They're going to try and hold a lot of the ball, build up slowly from the back, and be very methodical about their way they go about trying to score goals, where Victory are much more of an impromptu kind of team. They're going to really attack those transition moments and try get you in bursts. So Melbourne City really have to be vigilant the entire 90 minutes. That's going to be their MO. It's to make sure they're on top of their rotations and their passing combinations, and make sure they're breaking down that Victory team, and then not be asleep at the wheel when they turn the ball over. That's going to be the key, because they've got some really dangerous transitional threats, Victory. And, of course, Alex Chidiac is the name that jumps off the page there. So if you leave too many holes open in your rest defence when you're passing the ball around and cough it up, you're going to be in real trouble. So, expect City to have a lot of the ball, but Victory are always dangerous. So it's going to be a fascinating game. And I know Paletti, one of our mutual friends, likes to talk about, the idea in the dub that potentially some of these rivalries just get transplanted over from the men's game. And, probably the Big Blue and the original rivalry are good examples. These teams don't really have a history with each other in the women's game. Maybe Sydney FC, but just because they've both been good. But the Melbourne derby definitely is one with that City line divide that really gets the rivalries up in the women's game. So, it's going to be a fun fixture for sure.
It certainly will. Looking forward to seeing how that pans out. 8 goals between them last week. 2:15 kickoff, which could see the climate playing out. I'm not sure what the forecast is for Melbourne next week. I know it's warming up around the country as we head towards summer. So it could be a war of attrition, which is, again, falls to City trying to hang on to the ball, Melbourne trying to use their pace and skill, as you said, the likes of Chidiac, Morrison coming from the back. So we'll watch that one and wait. It does segue us into the last point I want to dig into before we wrap up for the day, though. Curtain raisers and double headers. Does it diminish the value of women's games? Does it add to the value of women's games? And from both points of, from a viewing point of view, if you're watching on TV, absolutely not. It doesn't really matter what games are back-to-back. I can sit there and park myself on the couch for 6 hours and watch 3 games of football. It's great. But we've seen it. There's a lot of the A-League dub clubs that want to play standalone games. Newcastle are one that are very passionate about doing that. I know from being inside the club. There's a lot of these teams that don't like to play before the game because they feel that fans turn up for the end of the game. They don't like to play after because the fans disappear. I don't know there's a perfect solution. I also understand trying to staff these things on, and when a lot of these clubs, realistically, as much as the numbers we see might seem like big budgets, they are the smell of an oily rag when you think about how many moving parts there are. What are your thoughts? Do you think there isn't a decisive factor? Do you think there is a balance of which way this lands?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I know, again, people at Palladi, they're feverishly against double headers, and I know a lot of passionate women's football people are against double headers, which I completely understand. I think you bring up the Newcastle Jets example. One of their luxuries in this competition is that they do really have a good following for their women's team, and they're consistently getting 2,000+. I would say it would be the number is that they're getting to all their home games, so they know that they don't need double headers to get really good support for their women's side, where that's not the case for some of the other women's teams. I think my perspective on this is that it just has to be viewed as transitional. We don't want in 20, 30 years' times when hopefully the A-League Women is everything we want it to be, and it's a destination league in Asia, and it's really high quality, and players are getting paid a lot of money, full-time professionals and all that, that at that point in time it has its own standalone fan base, and we don't need double headers to effectively make it super, super convenient for other people, even just to catch 15 minutes of it. That's not where we want to stand the women's game, but I do see the value of it at this point in time, but it can't be a long-term solution, I think.
I think one of the other things that might help this too is a little bit of investment in infrastructure around games and around grounds, because the challenge when you've got a 2:15 and then I think it's a 5 o'clock kickoff is if you are going to watch 2 games of football, that is a long afternoon and evening by the time you get through them. I understand, teams warming up, all those sorts of things, but maybe we need to have, either indoor areas, and we see that at some of the grounds that they've got that ability. And I'm not saying full warm-ups on indoor areas, but maybe, even if it's 15 minutes, every bit we can compress that makes it a little bit better. Or alternatively, external outdoor areas. You look at Amy Park, and I get that it's not perfect logistics, but if they can create a way for the teams to get across to Victoria Park, or if you have a look at, you have a look at the State of Origin, to switch to another code, New South Wales Blues warm up at the New South Wales Rugby League Centre of Excellence and then make a trek underground in this specially built tunnel over and pop out at the corner of the stadium, which is cool. It adds atmosphere, it adds all those sorts of things because it's something a little bit different. And again, we can't do that at all the grounds, but I think that's where you can try and come up with some pieces because, again, if there's a 45-minute gap after you've watched your men's team and you're not actually an active fan of the women's team, you're probably not going to hang around for 45 minutes while there's 15 minutes of fluff, 20 minutes of warm-up, players that you don't know, 10 minutes, then they come out and have a game. It's a summer sport. We've got, if we have an evening kickoff for the men's and we play the women before, it's hot, families are in the sun. If you play it after, they're stuck out there for a late night. So, again, I don't think there's a perfect solution. I don't think there's one way or the other, as you touch on. It depends on those fan bases, Lachie. So the ones with smaller fan bases, double headers are going to make sense from a logistical point of view. For clubs like Newcastle, I mean, if their women keep performing and their men don't get much better, they might start getting bigger crowds for their women, and the men might be the curtain raiser or the sideshow or whatever you want to call it. So we'll watch and see. It's an interesting space. There's no right answer, but that's what we love debating about. Yeah,
absolutely. I think you're right. Like, shortening the gap between the games is key. Like, if I can use a hockey example, most of these events get played at grounds where there's 2 pitches, and so the second pitch is used as a warm up. So when one game ends, the other team can come straight on, and it cuts down on that time in between because we know there's so much competition just for people's attention nowadays. The longer that gap is, we know right now people are watching and they're looking at the suggested videos on the YouTube, and they might just click on one and leave us. So we want to make sure our content is good. The A-League needs to do the same thing and ensure that there's a reason to stick around for these double headers and not giving people too many reasons to leave.
Agreed. We'll see how the double headers pan across the rest of the season. One thing we know is we've got an absolute plethora of A-League action coming this weekend. There'll be some more peak A-League moments, and we'll be back next week to talk about those. A big thanks there, Lachie. That's been a huge show for us. Let's close this out. A big thank you to you for tuning in. It's been great to dig into the A-Leagues and also a little bit of F1. It's been a leaner show, but as always, a big thank you to my co-hosts and producing team. JR, as always, mate, the ones, the twos, the F1, you've got it all.
Thank you, Chris.
And Lachie, as always, Roundball Australia is where they can find a little bit more info and dig in deeper to the football action, but we appreciate you coming on and throwing some actual education behind some opinions as opposed to me just waffling on at the lip.
Got to provide some balance somewhere, mate.
We appreciate it. We look forward to talking to you with all things sport next week. Let us know in the comments and through your feedback through our social media as to what else you'd like to see on the show. We'd love to get some more guests on. We'll be having a bit of chat about the Wallabies next week, but happy to dig into some more. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with lots of uninformed waffling on sports across the landscape next week.